I never imagined that a simple stop on my way to a defense briefing would change the trajectory of my career, and possibly the country's perception of military leadership. Brigadier General Aurora Daniels had served her country with unwavering loyalty. She'd commanded units overseas, led humanitarian operations, and even briefed the president personally. But none of that mattered on a quiet Monday morning when two local officers pulled her over in civilian clothes, questioning her presence in a high-security district just blocks away from the Pentagon. "I need to see some ID," one of them said, hand resting on his holster. She remained calm. "I'm General Daniels. I'm due at a classified meeting in 10 minutes. My military ID is here," but before she could finish her sentence, one officer reached for her arm, another began calling something over the radio. She tried to speak, to explain, to reason, but within moments, she was placed in handcuffs on the sidewalk like a common suspect. Passers-by watched in confusion. Some filmed on their phones. Aurora said nothing. Years of training kept her composed. But internally, she was stunned. Back at the local precinct, things quickly spiraled out of control. The supervising officer didn't recognize her name. No calls were made to verify her identity. No one even seemed to understand the gravity of who they had sitting in their custody. That is, until her aide, Lieutenant Rachel Keene, realized she hadn't shown up to the morning briefing. And that's when the Pentagon got involved. Lieutenant Keene paced the hallway outside the conference room, her phone glued to her ear. "She's not answering any calls. Her GPS signal went dark 30 minutes ago near Arlington Boulevard," she said, voice tight with concern. Major General Sorensen looked up from the briefing table. "She's never late. Never. Activate trace protocol and alert Pentagon security. Now." Within minutes, the Pentagon's internal response unit was moving. They quickly located traffic cam footage showing General Daniels being detained by local police, no resistance, no explanation. What shocked the brass wasn't just the mishandling, it was the complete lack of verification or follow-up. General Sorensen didn't hesitate. "Get me the Attorney General. And notify the Secretary of Defense." Meanwhile, at the local station, the desk sergeant's phone rang, and when he answered, his expression shifted from casual annoyance to pale panic. "Yes, sir, right away, sir. We didn't know." By the time the officers returned to the holding room, General Daniels was sitting quietly, hands folded, still in cuffs. They unshackled her without a word. One officer tried to apologize, stumbling over his words. But Aurora Daniels wasn't looking at them. She was staring straight ahead. Because for someone who had commanded troops under fire and negotiated ceasefires between factions, the sting of being dismissed and ignored on her own nation's soil hit in a completely different way. And she wasn't going to let this slide. General Daniels walked out of the precinct in complete silence, flanked by two Pentagon security officers who had been dispatched the moment the Secretary of Defense was informed. The media hadn't caught wind of it, yet. But it was only a matter of time. Back at the Department of Defense, she was offered a private medical check, legal counsel, and the option to take immediate leave. She declined all three. "I want a full investigation," she said flatly. "And I want to appear before the Oversight Committee myself." Word spread fast across the Pentagon. By evening, the story had reached Capitol Hill. The facts were chillingly clear: a decorated general with top-level clearance, wrongfully arrested without cause, detained without verification, and disrespected despite immediate identifiers. And it had all been recorded. Secretary of Defense Langford made a call to the Department of Justice personally. "We can't afford silence on this," he said. "She's not just a soldier, she's one of our highest-ranking officers. If this happened to her, what does it say about the system?" Behind closed doors, some officials urged Daniels to stay quiet, to let the issue be handled internally. But she refused. "I didn't take an oath to keep quiet when something's broken. I took an oath to protect this country, even from its own negligence." Her scheduled appearance in court, originally a quiet testimony about military operations, had now become a national moment. The courtroom would be packed. And not just with military personnel. The Pentagon was about to make a move no one expected. The day of the court hearing arrived with a tension that buzzed through every corridor of the courthouse. Reporters were stationed outside in droves, whispering speculations and snapping photos of every black SUV that rolled up to the curb. Inside, the gallery was standing room only, officers in uniform, civilian staffers from the Department of Justice, a few Congress members sitting quietly in the back, and even legal observers from federal watchdog groups. General Daniels entered the courtroom in full dress uniform, ribbons and medals neatly arranged across her chest. She walked with quiet confidence, head high, her expression unreadable. No one dared question her presence this time. Then something no one had predicted happened. As the judge called the hearing to order, a side door opened. In walked Secretary of Defense Langford, accompanied by a Pentagon legal advisor and a military ethics officer. There was a collective murmur. The courtroom froze. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Secretary, to what do we owe this unexpected presence?" Langford stood. "Your Honor, I'm here to submit a formal amicus briefing on behalf of the United States Department of Defense. It pertains to the mishandling of one of our commanding officers and the broader national security implications of this incident." General Daniels didn't flinch, but her eyes met Langford's briefly. That was all she needed. Because now, this wasn't just her fight. It was officially the government's. The judge took a moment to read the Pentagon submitted documents. The courtroom was silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the clicking of a few reporters' keyboards. "Let the record show," the judge finally said, "that the Department of Defense has entered a formal statement asserting this arrest may have compromised national operational protocols, damaged internal trust structures, and violated jurisdictional protocols for handling high-ranking officials." The officer who had initiated the arrest sat stiffly beside his attorney. His face had drained of all color. The courtroom doors opened again. This time, a representative from the Office of the Inspector General entered, followed by a federal compliance observer. Their presence made it clear, this incident had triggered an internal audit at multiple levels, and accountability was going to be more than symbolic. General Daniels was called to the stand. She spoke with clarity and poise, recounting the facts of the arrest without bitterness, but with unmistakable precision. "I complied. I identified myself. I followed instructions. I offered access to confirm my identity. None of it mattered. The system failed, not just me, but the integrity of our command structure." Her voice echoed through the courtroom. "If the uniform I've worn for over 2 decades doesn't carry weight with those sworn to uphold the law, then we have a procedural failure worth addressing, urgently." The judge nodded slowly, scribbling notes. The hearing wasn't over, but the tone had shifted entirely. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about reform. By the time General Daniels stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom was no longer a battleground, it had become a mirror reflecting hard truths about procedural gaps and unchecked assumptions within law enforcement systems. The judge called for a recess. In the hallway, reporters clamored for a statement, but Daniels kept walking, flanked by Pentagon legal staff and her aide, Lieutenant Keene. Cameras caught the determined look on her face, a calm resolve that was far more powerful than outrage. Inside the private conference room, Secretary Langford turned to her. "We're launching a cross-agency task force. This won't be buried in memos." Daniels nodded. "Good. I don't want punishment. I want standards." Word had begun to spread far beyond the courtroom. Veterans groups, active duty personnel, and even foreign military liaisons reached out in support. Her arrest had sparked something larger, a call for accountability in how public servants, even the most decorated among them, are treated by the institutions meant to protect them. Back in court, the judge reconvened and cleared his throat. "I am referring this case for federal review. There appear to be serious procedural errors and failures of basic due diligence. General Daniels, the court recognizes your dignity, your service, and your professionalism under extraordinary pressure. There was no applause, just respectful silence. But across the country, on live broadcasts and social feeds, millions watched. The general had not just spoken for herself. She had spoken for everyone who's ever been overlooked, dismissed, or denied the respect they've earned. And the Pentagon wasn't done yet. The aftermath of the courtroom hearing didn't just stay within the legal system, it rippled across every military base, law enforcement academy, and government agency with a stake in procedural integrity. Within 48 hours, the Secretary of Defense held a press briefing from the Pentagon. The arrest of Brigadier General Aurora Daniels was not only unwarranted, but exposed gaps in coordination between federal and local authorities. As of today, we are issuing updated protocols to ensure proper identification and verification processes for all military personnel, regardless of circumstance or setting. Behind him stood Daniels, still in uniform, still composed. But this time, she wasn't the one under scrutiny. She was the one inspiring change. The Pentagon announced that a new policy would be named in her honor, the Daniels Protocol, a set of guidelines requiring law enforcement to follow strict procedures when interacting with individuals identified as federal personnel, with immediate access to verification databases and command center liaisons. It wasn't about special treatment. It was about recognition. About function. About fixing a process that should never have failed in the first place. Later that evening, Aurora sat in her office, looking out over the Washington skyline. Her phone buzzed constantly, calls from senators, military commanders, even former students she had mentored through ROTC. But one call stood out. It was from the president. "I saw what you did today, General," he said. "And I want you to know, you've elevated more than just your rank. You've set a new standard for every leader in this country." She didn't smile. She just said, "Thank you, sir." Because for General Daniels, this wasn't about applause. It was about purpose. Weeks passed, but the momentum didn't slow. General Daniels began receiving invitations to speak, not just at military institutions, but at law schools, leadership conferences, and congressional panels. She agreed to only a few, choosing substance over spectacle. At the U.S. Army War College, she delivered a powerful keynote. "Our systems are only as strong as our willingness to correct them. Authority must never be confused with infallibility. Real leadership, true service, means holding even the mechanisms of power accountable when they fall short." Her words struck a chord. Cadets and senior officers alike took notes. Some nodded. Others stood to applaud. Meanwhile, internal audits were already underway across multiple agencies. Officers involved in her arrest faced administrative review, not with vengeance, but with the goal of correcting training deficiencies. The precinct issued a formal statement acknowledging the mishandling and agreed to cooperate with ongoing procedural reforms. Behind closed doors, Daniels continued advising the Pentagon on the implementation of the Daniels Protocol. She insisted the reform be practical, not symbolic. "It's not about me," she told the task force. "It's about making sure the next officer, the next civilian contractor, the next federal agent, isn't silenced, delayed, or dismissed because someone couldn't see past assumptions." One evening, as she left the Pentagon late, a young enlisted soldier in uniform approached her outside the entrance. "Ma'am," he said, saluting. "I just wanted to say thank you, for showing us how to fight without firing a shot." Daniels returned the salute. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Months later, the case that once threatened to tarnish General Daniels' reputation had become a defining moment in modern military and civil leadership. She was promoted to Major General with full honors, an advancement not granted as compensation, but earned through her continued service, integrity, and the calm resilience she had shown through the storm. At her promotion ceremony, Secretary Langford took the podium first. Some leaders lead from the front lines. Others lead through crisis. General Daniels has done both, and in doing so, she reminded this nation that rank alone doesn't define greatness. Courage does. As the crowd stood in a quiet ovation, Daniels took the microphone. Her remarks were brief, but powerful. "I never asked for this spotlight. But I understand now that sometimes the mission chooses you. And when it does, you stand your ground. You tell the truth. And you leave the door open behind you, so others can walk through it safer than you did." That evening, as she returned home, Daniels placed a framed version of the Daniels Protocol on her study wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that silence is never the path to progress. That respect must be built, earned, and defended, even when the cost is high. And that sometimes, the most important battles are the ones you win in courtrooms, not combat zones. A year later, the Daniels Protocol was fully implemented across federal and local law enforcement databases nationwide. It had become standard procedure, not just policy on paper, but part of training manuals, onboarding, and field operations. General Daniels, now retired from active duty, was appointed as a senior advisor to the Joint Committee on Defense Oversight. Her role wasn't ceremonial, she had a seat at the table and a voice that mattered. One afternoon, she visited a training center where young officers were going through their first lessons in federal coordination procedures. In a simulation room, she watched quietly as two recruits responded to a mock traffic stop involving a high-ranking official. They followed protocol flawlessly: verification, respect, clear communication. When the simulation ended, one of the instructors noticed her. "General Daniels," he said with a smile. "Would you like to speak to them?" She stepped forward. "I see a lot of potential here," she said. "But more importantly, I see awareness. That's how change sticks. Not through fear, or headlines, or scandal. Through awareness. Through intention." The recruits listened, captivated. "Leadership," she continued, "is about standing up when the easy thing to do is look away. You may never know whose life you're impacting, but I promise you, if you lead with principle, you'll never regret it." As she left the facility, Daniels looked up at the American flag waving above the building. She had worn the uniform with pride. And now, even without it, she continued to serve, with the same mission, the same conviction, and a legacy that would outlast titles, ranks, and headlines. She wasn't just the general who stood up after being wrongfully arrested. She was the general who turned a moment of failure into a movement of change.